We really appreciate everybody being here today, and especially our sponsors who have made all of this possible. You guys are amazing, and those of you who are caregiving, we're so happy that you're here. There are a lot of people in your boat. I'm a volunteer here at Riverbend and coordinate the family caregiving programs and ministries that we offer. And I'm not a professional, but I have spent many years in the trenches, right where many of you are. So I have learned along the way that we're all in this boat together. It takes a village. We have to help each other out. And that's what we're all about today. So I want to thank you all very much for participating. I'm going to let our panelists introduce themselves right quick, and then we're going to dive into some questions. Hopefully, we'll try not to be redundant, but maybe you'll get a few good nuggets out of this afternoon to take home with you. So I'm going to start with Cyndi. Go ahead.
We're figuring out our system here. So, hey, my name is Cyndi Cummings. I am a realtor with Realty Austin, and I have an ancillary business called Turnkey Transitions, which is a move management company. And there's a whole movement for move management. You probably haven't heard about it. You don't hear about it until you need it. In addition, I am a caregiver for my 84-year-old mother who lives with me.
Hello, everyone. Again, my name is Shauna Wheeler. I'm the memory care advisor for Arden Courts. I'm also a certified dementia practitioner.
Good afternoon. My name is June Waters, and I'm the long-term care ombudsman.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so let's start. I talked about this morning making the decision, how to make the decision to make changes and bring in extra help or make changes with residents. And they also talked about families, and family dynamics are huge. We all know. So one of the questions that we want to address is, when you've made that promise to mom or dad that you'll never move them into one of those places. Anybody in here that might be in that position? How do you back off of that? And how do you not make that promise to begin with?
In memory care, what I do to counsel the families is just say, you promised your mom when she didn't have dementia. She is now no longer that person. Her brain is starting to die. You can no longer care for her appropriately anymore. You're not breaking a promise. You're adjusting to her care needs.
Okay.
Can I add
and it's okay.
One thing I would add is that recognizing that when you've already made that promise, and so for an ombudsman, we look at the quality of life and quality of care for residents, and that's what we advocate for. And so now that you've made that promise, realize that you're in the grieving process of having to undo that promise. And we look at the quality of care and quality of life for this resident, for your mother, for your father, or a loved one, and know that it's a process, and know that the dignity of this resident as well. Is it truly safe for both of y'all, or multiple people, to still have the resident outside of the facility that could cater to their needs that they need at this time? And with grieving, there's also a lot of forgiveness. And so that's something that we advocate for as well, is to just recognize that and to grow into acceptance. And so if you've already made that promise, really honor your own grieving process and the grieving process of where your parent or loved one is at in that moment.
Good, thank you, June. Very nice. What are some of the strategies to approach selling the family home or the home where your loved one lives? If that is an option for you, if you don't have to do it for financial reasons, how do you start that conversation? Cyndi?
Okay, so how do you start the conversation? Oftentimes I relate it to safety first. So if somebody's living in a home and they're not necessarily safe any longer in a home, then that's a whole conversation to start. It's a critical conversation families have to have all the time. You know, I've heard often when people say, I'm going out feet first, you know, from a home. Unfortunately, sometimes they do go out feet first because of the home. And so when I'm working with my mom or when I'm counseling other adult children, I suggest to them that they use a story about somebody else that they've heard about. I mean, not a made up story, but like a real story. So this is my story. So I had a client who was going to be moving after Christmas. First, he was going to be moving in, you know, November, then December. He said, okay, I'm going to wait until after Christmas. So after Christmas, I called him. He didn't answer the phone. I knew his daughter, called his daughter. He had laid for 2 days in his house because he had fallen and the weather was bad. He broke a hip. So sadly, what happened was he was skipping from going from his home into independent living where he was going to have woodworking and have this wonderful new life. And he skipped that step. And because he was going to be in a wheelchair, he had to go into assisted living. So in that case, we knew his house wasn't safe. We could walk at the house. We could see rugs all over. You know, we were making suggestions. Well, maybe pick up the rugs since you're in a walker and things like that. But he was living in an unsafe home. And in this particular situation, then it made it be that he had to move out sooner and into a level that was higher than what he originally wanted. So that's one of the ways to talk about selling the house. Strategies for selling the house right now. Things are a little different in the Austin market. It's not the crazy years that it has been. It's much more stable. It's actually a really nice market because it's not so frenzied and it's just stable. So we like that. But there is statistically, you know, there are times of the year when it's better to sell your home. And you should always look at that when you're selling your home. So statistically, May, June is a better time to sell. It means you have more buyers. So that could be good. But I think one of the questions was financially, if you needed the money from the sale of the home to be able to move, what could you do instead of staying in the home? And what we find is when people stay in their home, when they're selling their home, it's not safe in a lot of situations. It's very, very, very stressful to have to keep your house clean, get out the dog, get the people out of the house. So it's always better if you can move first. If you can't move first, then a suggestion is to look at a company, for example, is Elder Life Financial, and they'll give you a bridge loan. A lot of the senior living communities know about Elder Life. You probably know about them too. And they're a great company in that they'll provide you with the money that you need to be able to move into the community, and then you can leave the house and you can have a safe environment. So I think that answered.
And what about liquidating? I mean, we all have so much stuff, don't we? Storerooms here, storerooms there, and I was realizing the other day that my garage is probably the most expensive storage space on earth. We haven't gotten 2 cars in there in a long time. So what about liquidating, and how do you have those conversations with your parent or your spouse?
So a lot of times liquidating comes down to safety again. So we're finding where our older adult loved one can't even get from the living room to the kitchen. Now they have a walker and they have too much furniture. They're tripping over things. So it's a safety thing first off. Some suggestions for liquidating, at least you're in the garage. I have clients who are paying for 3 or 4 storage units, which is just, I mean, hundreds of dollars a month. And all your stuff is that gathering of all the stuff is just a decision that you're not making. I'm a downsizing coach, and so I work with a lot of people. All you're doing is just putting off making the decision. Sit down and make decisions. What I recommend is doing what we call our heirloom, our sentimental items. Go ahead and give those away to people now that you know will love them and that they'll enjoy them, and you'll be able to see them loving and enjoying them. But the reality is there's a New York Times article that says your kids don't want your stuff. So you just got to get over that. It kills me. I mean, I do sneaky things with my daughter all the time. Are you sure you don't want this? I brought over a bag of grandma. I don't want it, Mom. They're minimalist, right? The millennials are minimalist. The sad thing is, that's the same group of people who are making purchases of items. So even if you say, and I hate this, I will see China sets that are amazing and I want to buy them because they're $15 or $20 and I know there were hundreds of dollars. Millennials don't want China sets. So there's no market for them. So you have to think about creative ways of putting those items into people's hands that will use and love them. So an idea is working with wedding coordinators. Sometimes wedding coordinators will have mismatched china at their wedding. So think about ways that you can give your items to somebody who will love it and that's not your kids.
Oh, I want to know that. Okay, so once we've made the decision, now I apologize, I've kind of had my back to you guys on this side. I'll try to twist around a little bit. Once we've made the decision that a change needs to be made, what is the best way to go about visiting communities, finding out about communities, the questions to ask, and maybe the best times to visit and how to visit, and then whether to take your loved one with you. You got all that, Shauna?
Oh, yeah, sure. I'm glad you bring this up. Sorry about that. The most important questions to ask assisted living or memory care, all the questions are good. Every question, any kind of question you have, I suggest that you write down all your questions so you don't forget your questions when you're sitting in front of the marketer. But one of the ones that I like to hear from my families is, how do you communicate? If mom's condition changes, if her medication needs to be changed, how do you communicate that with a family member? Because there's a lot of places where things can fall under the rug. If you set that bar that you want to know when mom's meds change, you want to know before she goes, to a different doctor. So it's real important that you have that really strong communication with the nurse that's in the community, with the executive director, with everybody that you find important that's going to give you good feedback. Also, staff longevity. What kind of turnover rate do they have? That happens in every community. No community is perfect. If they tell you they're perfect, they're lying to you. But longevity kind of lends into what the culture of the building is, how strong the leadership is, how they treat the caregivers. That's real important. Caregivers are really, truly angels. What they have to go through every day to care for their residents is just amazing. Ask for references, ask to talk to past family members, ask to talk to current family members. Show up one day and go into activities. If you see another family member, go up and ask them. If they try to hold you back from that, they're trying to hide something from you. So transparency is real important anywhere you go. You want to know that you're going to be able to communicate with other family members and just be able to get that kind of feedback. Every community is different. When you walk in, the best thing is the kind of feeling that you get. Just listen to your instincts, listen to your gut. It's, because every community offers something different. Let's see what else you got here. And how do they handle transition? You're not gonna, a lot of kids think, I'm just gonna dump mom in a home and walk away and they're not gonna take care of her. Ask them how they deal with the transition, what the actual steps, what the first 3 days are gonna look like for you. Most places are really good with transition. They make the resident feel welcome immediately when they come in the door. So, but just get a communication as to how the transition is gonna happen. You also asked here, how valid are quoted staffing ratios? That varies per building. We're all pretty much held to the same standard. It's roughly 1 to 8 in memory care. But that's not to say if somebody calls in sick, somebody gets in a wreck on their way there and they don't show up. There's going to be times where staffing is going to be challenging in every building. It's life. How do they handle that though? What happens? There's been several times where I've gone back, they couldn't get in until 7 o'clock that night. All the office staff went back and served dinner to the residents. So how do they handle it when they're shorthanded? And then you've got, how do you find inspection and rating information? That'll be on the state. It's HCCSA, HCCSA, I believe. It used to be DADS back in the day. But you can find out all kinds of complaints that have been issued against them, any kind of dings in their licensure when they come in, they do an inspections. That's also a helpful thing to do, help you sort out, you know, what buildings you want to go to, what communities you want to go to. For you to go out and start doing the initial, I would recommend Michael Gill or Sarah Hyde Williams. They're excellent. They are hands-on. They're not going to just shoot your name out there to 20 different communities. They're going to narrow it down to what's going to fit your family the best way. So I highly recommend both of them.
Shauna, I don't know if you or June could answer this the best, but what are the actual state requirements for staffing ratios, or are there any?
It's like 1 to
Do you
15,
have-
isn't it?
Is there a benchmark?
So for assisted living, right now, the wording is, I believe it's sufficient. And so that's something that is trying to be passed through legislation and has been talked about many, many times. And I know that, you know, recently I was on a call where the staffing turnover is for resident care assistants is 96%. And being in Austin, there is a lot of staff turnover. There's a lot of staff shortage. We're getting a lot of interim administrators. We're getting a lot of administrators who have never been an administrator before. You know, we're seeing a lot of people not knowing their role and giving a lot of misinformation as administrators. And so we're getting a lot more calls as the Ombudsman staff and providing a lot more education and INA, which is information and assistance. And I know that the difference between like memory care and dementia certified, it's after 17 residents, then the staffing ratio comes into effect. Whereas memory care, I think dementia certified, their staff have to be educated a certain number of hours a year and stuff like that. There's a little bit more. And I know that the state's getting stricter on that. So some facilities, sometimes they like to tag that on, even though they're not. And so I know the state's kind of cracking down on that a lot more as we're seeing dementia increase. So.
Yeah, thanks. That's one thing that I have found in working with the families that I work with too, is that there's a lot of confusion about memory care, assisted living, and licensed dementia or Alzheimer's care. And I think Shauna could speak to this more and what the differences are and what to ask, because I think there are memory care communities that say they're a memory care community, but then there's also a licensed memory care community, and that's different, right?
Yes. The difference between the assisted living and memory care is pretty obvious, well, to me, but it's pretty clear. To be in memory care, you have to have a dementia diagnosis. We have both licenses, and that's the same for any freestanding memory care community. The difference with us is we're a secured building. We are able to lock our doors. We are able to lock our gates. Where assisted living, there's more freedom with that.
Okay, and the staff training.
Oh, yes, definitely.
And I would add that, so I know that, actually I'm not going to name names. If a facility is assisted living and they have residents that have dementia and they don't have a secured unit, you do want to ask if they provide or if they have the ability to have wonder guards. And that would be, so if a resident were to exit a building, there would be an alarm that would go off. And so that would help decrease the chances of a resident being found a block, 2 blocks, a mile away, or lost for a couple of hours outside of the building. And so I think that that's kind of helpful as well. So not all memory care facilities are locked. Most of them are, but for those facilities that are assisted living and have memory care, and you know, you do want to see if they have a wonder guard.
Okay.
Sharon wanted to talk about training too. In our community, we require 12 hours of dementia care training from all our employees, even our housekeeping staff, myself, everybody has to go through that. We have quarterly requirements on HIPAA laws, workplace safety. Tip of Snow does a quarterly training for us that everybody's mandatory to do. And also we have monthly meetings that are mandatory for all our caregivers. So we go over things like Lewy body or how to approach somebody when they're sundowning. So the training in memory care, because it's a totally different population, we have to know, you know, you don't come up behind somebody and, you know, tap on their shoulder because that's going to scare the hell out of them.
And what about memory care in a nursing home? What does that mean when they say, oh, we also have memory care here? What does that mean?
That's pretty much just Medicaid. Like if they couldn't afford to do private pay, they would go to a Medicaid facility in nursing. The private pay ones are more communities. They're not like the clinical kind of skilled.
Okay, but if a skilled nursing facility says they have memory care, I think from my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, that just means that there is a wing where the door is locked.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
That's basically it. So it's good to know the differences in those levels of care. Let's move on to, well, here's a question. Why are the rooms in memory care and also in assisted living so small in nursing homes too, besides the real estate issue? Okay,
Well,
we all know real estate is expensive, and they try to get as many rooms as they can in there, but I think there are some psychological reasons for that. Can you address that?
In memory care, I'm not sure about assisted living because I've seen some pretty big rooms in assisted living, but in memory care, a large room is going to overwhelm our residents. As the dementia bubble gets smaller and smaller, we want them to see the bathroom. We want them to see their walker. So it's made for their safety, for some people with dementia, their safety. That's why it's so small, but it's not teeny tiny. I mean, I don't want to make it sound like a closet, but it's, you know, roughly 11 by 16 is appropriate for a person with dementia.
And I think sometimes with people with dementia and Alzheimer's, they're more comfortable in a smaller space.
Yeah, it's a nice,
It's kind of like a
haven.
nest.
Yeah, it's their safe haven.
Because as the disease progresses, their peripheral vision closes down and their sense of space changes. So what used to be comfortable in a big roomy house doesn't feel good anymore. So there are some real solid reasons for that. Another one too, I think, is that the communities want to encourage their residents to spend time outside of their room, right?
Yeah, in the community
And doing activities and not staying in their room in their recliner watching TV.
Right.
I know that my parents really flourished two different times. Once when they left their neighborhood and their home that they lived in for 35 years and moved into an independent living community. And they moved from a 4,000 square foot house into a little 2-bedroom garden home. But there was so much to do. And they had so many people around them. They were pretty social. But everyone in their neighborhood had left or died. It was an older neighborhood. That houses had turned over and become rental property. They didn't know any of their neighbors, and then besides all the stuff that comes with maintenance of an older house. But when they moved into independent living, they just really flourished. And then 12 years later, they moved into assisted living. And I moved from Midland to Austin into assisted living, which was a huge, huge thing. But they loved it. They really did. And I think that sometimes, even though we want to keep our loved ones at home as much as we can and for as long as we can, and sometimes that works. But I know in the case of my mom, she was such a social being and she never would have been happy living in my house. She would have been bored. And even in the nursing home, she had a good time. So it's not always a bad thing. So the ombudsman's office, is everybody clear on what that is part of the Capital Area Council of Governments and the Area Agency on Aging, right?
Yes.
So it is a state program. They have trained and registered or licensed.
You're certified.
Certified. Okay, well, it's the third one. Certified ombudsmen that are trained to be advocates for families in long-term care settings. And I personally have taken advantage of that in my background. And was so thankful to know they were there. It's something that a lot of people don't know about. But the reason we included June and that perspective on this panel is to try to come up with some strategies and ideas to prevent the things that they see. There are steps to take when you're in a long-term facility. If something goes wrong, there are troubleshooting steps that you can take, and we'll get to that in just a minute. But the ombudsman is part of that. And they can be really, really helpful if something goes sideways. Before you get to the point where you're really going crazy or you're filing a complaint with the state or something like that. So we want to avoid those things as much as we can. So what are a few things that you can think of, June, that we can employ when we're making this decision, that we can set our family and our family members up for success?
Yeah, so I would suggest that if you find that your loved one needs to go into a facility, whether it's assisted living or nursing facility, and you're not sure what their routine has been, or you are sure, mom wakes up at this time early in the morning, she likes her showers at this time, know that residents have choice, freedom of choice. And even if they tell you, well, this is what your mom's shower schedule is going to look like, and we're gonna do it on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays, and it's going to be in the evening, and you've known that your mom has always enjoyed her showers in the morning, that's something that's simple to us but can mean so much to a resident, is to keep as much of their routine as possible. Also, and maybe they've always enjoyed Monday, Wednesday, Friday versus Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. Also, really take advantage of the care plan meeting, the first one, as well. If there's an assisted living, it's going to be a service plan meeting, but that's where they get all the disciplinaries. So you have your dietary, a director of nursing, the administrator or executive director, and the activities, and you get to speak with them about, and with your loved one there, what kind of diet do they like? I know nowadays, like, sodium is one of the main complaints I hear, a lot of sugar. If your loved one has diabetes, there's not a lot of friendly diet things at the facility. So those are some of the things that we advocate for, of, what does the alternate menu look like? How consistent is the cooks at the facility? How do they gain feedback from the residents? Do they have a resident council? And that's where residents get to meet once a month. They have a resident council president, a secretary, and they talk. So it's residents who talk amongst one another to see, like, what are some complaints that they may have or suggestions. And ombudsman can go upon invitation, as well as their staff too. So I would really see, like, who's the current resident council president. Speak with them, see, like, what are some common complaints that's been going on at the facility, what are concerns that residents have, how have the administration addressed those concerns, or do they get told excuses a lot of what they can't do, and also just, I guess, really try to listen to your loved one. Sometimes I'll get a phone call and I have to meet the resident first, just to make sure that this is a concern that they have too. And sometimes it's hard because a loved one may have a concern, and I talk with the resident and it's not their concern at all. They're like, actually, I love the activities, and the loved one may call me and say, mom's not getting enough activity. I also understand that sometimes residents want to have a very good first impression, so they may not open up to me the first or second visit. And so I let the loved one know, because sometimes it can be frustrating. They're like, well, mom's called me and complained all week, and now you go and visit her and she tells you there's nothing wrong. And I like to say, hey, it takes time. And also, I also understand there's a difference in generation, and that generation, they don't want to be seen as complainers. They don't want to seem like there's any problems. Many of them have a deep fear of retaliation. And so I always say, hey, I'm not going anywhere. I'll come back next week. I'll build that rapport. And before I know it, they start opening up to me, and then the complaints start coming. So it's not a lost cause if your loved one does not open up our very first meeting about all the complaints that they've been telling you. Sometimes too, I can ask other residents about what's going on. And if they have similar complaints, then it could still get resolved, but maybe not directly from your loved one, right? So if the food has, has just been atrocious, or there hasn't been consistent staff or something like that, maybe other residents have that concern, and then collectively that starts getting resolved. And your mom gets to have a positive effect of that as well. And so just know that, we are here as our ombudsman. We see them. We go and check in with the facilities as well. So we may pop in and visit with your mom another time. And that's okay. Like, if they don't tell us all of their complaints like they've told you, but let us know what those complaints are, so that way, whenever we do visit with your loved one, we can ask those certain questions. And so, yeah, I think patience as well really helps. But I would also say double check the face sheet and make sure that they have.
What is the face sheet?
So face sheet is what the staff will see when the resident's name pops up. It'll say like their dietary needs, it'll have medications, it'll have any of their diagnoses, and it will also have the contact information. So if the resident were to fall, if the resident were to have a change in behavior or medication, they have COVID, the nurse then will know who to contact. And you want to make sure that they have the correct contact information. If it only needs to be the POA, or it also needs to be, maybe the POA is a wife, or, and then you also want a child to be notified as well. Make sure that they have everybody that they need to contact on that, so that way everybody's on the same page and in the loop. Because I've seen where the resident had COVID, only one person was contacted, that person doesn't talk to anybody else, and it was very clear that the resident wanted more than one person in the loop on what was going on with their health. And so we just want to make sure that we're not waiting a year later and we're like, oh, actually my number needs to be on there too. So just make sure that the facility, because sometimes only what the staff can see is what they're going to use. So if you have more than one person in your life that is going to be in contact with this resident, and their health and everything like that's going to be needed, that it's updated and you have all the right information.
I also found in my experience that calling the ombudsman in to help is not necessarily an adversarial move as far as the facility is concerned. And the more you can approach the staff as a facility as a team, and just keep talking that way when you talk to the administrator, the director of nurses, or whoever. I'm in this with you. We're doing this together. We all have the same goal in mind, and that's the best quality of life and safety for my loved one. And even when you're having problems, try not to go into the room adversarially. Try to go in as a team. We're a team. We're working together on this. What can I do to help you do your job easier? But I kind of got off on a tangent there, but I was going to say that when you call the ombudsman in, it sounds like it might be something that the facility would look down upon, but it really isn't, because they know you're working as a team, and they kind of know what the next steps are if they don't, kind of clean up their act, right? So talking about care plan meetings, They have, all the facilities are required to have a care plan meeting with their staff and the family members within a certain amount of time that the resident moves in. Is that the first 3 months? The first care plan meeting is within 3 months. I'm not real sure, but you can, as a family member, request a care plan meeting anytime you want to. If something's going sideways, you can ask to have a care plan meeting.
Well, the care plan meeting should also be. A care plan meeting should also happen whenever there's a change in condition. And they're gonna need more care. They're gonna be required to be helped fed. That should definitely, that's a standard. That should definitely happen anytime there's a change in condition.
And that can happen every week or two sometimes. I remember in a couple of situations with 2 different family members where we had care plan meetings a week or 2 apart and changed the care plan because they got out of the hospital, they had a relapse, they came back, you know, all of these different situations. You can ask for those meetings to happen anytime you want to. That's your right. And you can also ask for who you would like to have in that meeting. If your loved one is not participating in activities, you can ask specifically for the activities director to be there. If you're having problems with diet, or they're supposed to be on a special diet that's not being followed, make sure that the dietitian or the head chef or whoever's in charge of the meals is there. Same with physical therapy. If they're having therapies, make sure that the therapist is there. So just make a list of who you want to talk to when you request that meeting. So I think that's something that a lot of folks aren't aware of. It's really important to read that 2-inch thick package of paper that you get when you move into a facility. And especially the contract. I mistakenly thought for a long time that you could move in and out of these facilities as however you wanted, that you really weren't locked into any kind of a lease and nothing is forever kind of thing. That's not always true. So make sure you ask the questions and you know, and you look at the contract that you're signing to see what your lease and what your agreement is. Do you have any other comments on that? What about you, Cyndi? Do you, when you're relocating people into facilities, what do you find in that way?
I think all the different senior living communities have different rules and regulations and contracts and things like that. So it could vary, it could go month to month, or it could be a 1-year lease. I know sometimes they'll have stipulations in the contract where you can break the lease if something happened, that something occurs. So somebody passed away, or something along those lines.
I would also ask, what would warrant my loved one being discharged from this facility? What kind of behavior changes? Also, what kind of services are provided in this? Does this monthly expense cover room and board? If they need additional, like I've seen where there's charges if you want a resident to receive water, like breaks, like where they go in and you give water reminders, they give your loved one some water. There's like a $400 charge a month for that. So I would definitely look at what does that rent expense cover, and what kind of activities. If they currently do not have an activities director, then what kind of vendors do they usually utilize? Transportation is a big one. So if your loved one needs, they go to dialysis or they go to the doctor regularly, is transportation covered, or is that do they use a third-party service, or do I need to find out how to transport my loved one when they have these doctor's appointments or other appointments? How frequently do they leave the building to go to different activities? What does that look like? Can the bus safely transport my loved one? I would also look at the difference between, I know it's later on, but the difference between a type A and type B facility. So the next question. So type A is where residents do not need help with evacuating the building if there is an emergency or a fire, and they do not need routine assistance throughout the night. Type B facility, the residents do need assistance with evacuating. They also need to be transferred, from their bed to the wheelchair, and they need to be routinely checked on in the middle of the night. So those are the two differences between type A and type B.
That's only in assisted living.
And assisted living,
And I
yes,
found out about that the hard way. So ask.
yes. And yeah, I think that's basically the main ones. And when do they prescribe medications like the psychotropic medication? What is their standard practice in that? And on the state website, they do have a list of questions to evaluate. And what they recommend is if your loved one has to go on an I can't say that word, but that medication, that it's at the lowest dose and it's for the least amount of time possible. And most of the time, facilities will start to notice perhaps hallucination or psychosis in a resident that has dementia. And that's usually when they'll prescribe that medication. And sometimes that can be difficult because if a loved one reads up on that, they can see that the side effects seem so like way worse than what's going on. And so you really want to see how does the facility handle that? What is their protocol? And if they fill out that questionnaire, and if they, make sure that you're also in the loop. And how do they decide if the resident can decide or not if they want to take that medication?
Okay, how are we doing on time, Rob? I can't see the clock for the. Oh, good. Okay, so we'll take another 5 minutes or so and then we'll take questions, okay? So if something goes sideways in a facility, the first thing to do is to talk with the director of nurses. Make the director of nurses your very best friend. That's your new best friend. And the administrator. Okay, those are and the med aide. Okay. Got a lot of new best friends when you move into a facility. So the first line of defense is to have direct one-on-one conversations with those people, depending on what the issue is. Second thing is to ask for a care plan meeting and go through that process and see if you can resolve it with the staff in the care plan meeting. Third step is the Ombudsman's office. And if you stop by the area agency on aging table out here, it's on the other side of the wall, probably the second or third one down from that end. The area agency on aging has the information on how to contact the Ombudsman's office. And then you can file a complaint with the state if they don't resolve it for you, and that's not fun. So Rob, can we open it up to questions? Are there any questions here? We'll kind of bounce back and forth between the room and Zoom.
So we did have a question from Zoom. Could you repeat the name of the website where you file your complaints against the community? What was the name of the website that was mentioned?
You don't file them.
You find them?
You don't file them on the website. That's where you can go to see if any complaints have been filed against them.
Where you
It's
find them?
the HCCSA.TEXAS.US, I believe.
Terrific. Thank you so much. I saw a hand over here. Yes, Lynn.
Hello, everybody. I had a question. I had two family caregivers. Can you hear me? Okay, all right. Ooh, okay. Two family caregivers had a situation in a senior assisted living community, and I thought of the Ombudsman, so we haven't met, but I need to talk to him. So one of them was the gentleman's wife, Miss Dinner. because he was visiting her and she was never called, so she went without food that night. So, wow, that was one, which seems minor compared to this other one. It was the wife of somebody who was in a senior community. She went to visit her husband and he had 2 bruised arms. Was afraid to go back in his room. Wow, that was scary. So, you know, I don't hear these stories very often, thank goodness. And so immediately, my co-facilitator said, contact the ombudsman. So I wanted to just see what is, you just mentioned, you know, the right things to do. Nothing was done when the nurse or the administrator, both of them were notified. Nothing happened. So the next step was to contact the ombudsman. I want to know more because I'd like to pass this on to other family caregivers. What is the process and how long would it take for you to get on it? This is not like, I mean, missing a meal is bad. That's very important in my life, but miss a meal, but to wake up with 2 bruised arms. And it happened at night and the person has dementia and didn't know what happened and wouldn't go back in his room. That's pretty bad. So what do you do and how long does it take to see some results to get help?
Right, so the first thing that we would recommend is if the family would want to call state, because so HHSC is the one who investigates abuse, neglect, exploitation. And so the missing the meal, the not being fed, that would go under neglect. And then for the bruises, that we would want to see if they can investigate that for abuse. And then they can also call the ombudsman office, and depending on which facility it is, most likely I would be the ombudsman for that facility. And I usually respond within 24 to 48 hours. I'm supposed to respond within 48 hours, but normally I react immediately. And what I would do is want to talk with the loved one, speak with the resident, see the resident in person, and then also talk with the administrator and see if they need an in-service. So I know right now I've been offering a lot of in-service training for staff for them to, lately I've been doing a lot of abuse, neglect, and exploitation because we are seeing a lot of burnout. We're seeing a lot of staff working a lot of hours. And so we just want to remind them about abuse is more than just physical as well. It can be verbal abuse. It can be in the way that they speak around residents. You know, this is their home. And then I would also want to see if they've done any recent training with the staff. And then most likely for the dinner, like I would definitely reach out to the family, visit with their resident, and then also see what is their protocol if a resident doesn't come down. Do they get checked on? Do they have dinner brought to them? What does that look like if a resident misses a meal or is not present in the dining room? And why do they have agency working so much that they don't know the residents, and so they didn't know that there was a person not in the dining room when they should have been in the dining room? And that's how I would go about it. But for an ombudsman, we have 24 to 48 hours to respond.
We had another question from online. Does the FMLA protect you if you are parental caregiving?
Want to read that question again?
Does FMLA protect you if you are parental caregiving?
Yeah.
So our experts in the room say yes. Who said yes? I'm coming to you.
Family Medical Leave Act. And so it would apply to you if your employer has qualifications that you would be covered under there. If you worked for the company for a year, it has a lot of protections for you. What I've also learned is that there's certain things that it can only apply to direct family members as opposed to in-laws. So there's a lot of rules and guidance. So talk to your HR, but it is there and it would protect you.
Thank you so much. I am coming to you. Yes, sir. Yeah, that's it.
like to clarify this. I've heard that if you move your loved one into one of the facilities, by way of profit pay, somehow they can't afford to pay, could the facility assess the rest of your assets? If they take that away, could they take any assets that you may have if you can't afford to pay facility?
If we had a resident, let's say that ran out of money, we would help the family transition into a more affordable community or a Medicaid community, whatever the case might be in that, but we don't, well, at least personally, our community, we've never gone after somebody's assets. We give a 30-day notice if they can't pay.
Good, thank you.
This is wonderful. This is wonderful if you live in Austin. What about if you live in Corpus Christi? Are there any facilities there?
Oh, yeah.
How do I find them?
You can go on that website that I listed before, or see if there's a local, ask Sarah, that lovely lady right back there, if she has a connection to somebody in Corpus Christi that can assist you in finding a place.
Also want to note that with the area agencies on aging, there is one in every major city. The idea is that every square inch of the US is covered by an area agency on aging. So you can go online and just search area agency on aging and the zip code, and it will tell you which area agency on aging serves that particular area. One of the things that the area agency agents are charged with is no wrong door, which means they have resource information for that area, and then they can help you find the one specific to that area. And that's for anywhere within the US, you can find those.
My question is, as soon as you call Ombudsman's office, it becomes adversarial. The facility would say, oh, this guy calls this office. There's a little tension there already, right? And it's not like, okay, we're a team and you're calling somebody from outside to help us all. No, it seemed like you're becoming already a party fighting them. Yeah, they become defensive.
So in my experience, that has not been the case. I've even had administrators call me and I have to tell them I'm your resident advocate, not your advocate. But in a loving way. And because I'm really about, we're all here for the resident, for the quality of life, empowering their voice, and coming with solution and coming with, like, at the end of the day, what is this issue that needs to be addressed and how can I help? And so I haven't really seen, even in facilities that have stayed in there every other week, I'm there as well most times, and it really hasn't been like that at all. And I've had some tough conversations with administrators, but at the end of the day, they know why I'm there, and that's to advocate for the resident and to make sure the resident feels comfortable. Because also when the resident feels comfortable, they're able to be more relaxed. Nobody wants to see a resident upset. The staff doesn't like to see that either. And so what I've seen is that it becomes a more relaxed environment, and communication gets better, because sometimes I've seen a lot of tension comes from miscommunication. And so as soon as we can clear up that communication, the better environment it will be for everybody involved. The less calls, frantic calls that a loved one can have, because now the resident knows where they could be heard and where action can be taken place. And so I really think that times are changing, especially since COVID. I feel like we're realizing that we are all one and we are all here to help. And so I think now we're leaning on each other, especially in healthcare. I just feel like the retaliation has definitely decreased, because we know that we're working through trying times, especially with the staff shortage.
We have about 10 minutes left, so we'll catch just a couple more questions.
This is not actually a question. My mother had long-term care insurance, and if she stayed like
she liked to go to the state park cabins. If she stayed more than a day or two, they wouldn't pay for the days she was away. But where she was in assisted living, they wanted the care, they wanted the pay for that time. So it's something, you know, you have to look at your insurance plan, but we were kind of surprised about that.
Coming straight over there to you.
Hi, thank you so much for giving us all this information. There was a mention about becoming best friends with the director of nursing. And there's also a lot of roles. And so we've had a journey change in the last 4 weeks with my mom, and she's in a rehab skilled nursing facility now. And I'm having to adjust to all of the roles in one of those facilities. And it is a Medicaid facility, but it's in a rural area. So the rural area functions a little bit differently than what it does in an area like Austin. So I have, there's lots of different roles in that facility: director of nursing, assistant director of nursing, the hall nurse, the hall aides, the people that work in the cafeteria, there's PT, OT, the social worker, the business office manager. There's so many different roles. And I was wondering if you could just speak a little bit about maybe the uniformity of those roles across Medicaid facilities, and how we might be a partner with each of those roles.
So I would also recommend to get to know the social worker, because they're really going to also be, like, we kind of work hand in hand a lot of times, because they can address, like, if there's any change in the resident, if they're needing more resources, if they are needing more activities. It's like the whole being of the resident. And from there, I know that sometimes the DON can be a little bit overwhelmed. And so, but the DON and ADON will work with the resident and their medication. If they have any, like, if they've been talking about pain, if they're losing a lot of weight, if they really experience any drastic changes, usually the nurse or the CNAs will let the DON know what's going on with their resident if something, is in dire need. And then OT and PT, they're really good with a lot of, like, helping the resident be transferred, helping the resident gain a little bit of their muscle back and their ability to their independence, basically. And especially if she's there for a rehab stay, normally it's going to be a shorter stay than being a long-term care resident. And I would say that for our program, we are advocates for the long-term care stay residents. And so in that regard, I would really recommend building rapport with the social worker, because they could be in contact and send an email out if they needed more, OT, PT. And then if it feels like if the resident is becoming stagnant, sometimes that can also affect insurance. And so you would really want to make sure that they do assessments regularly to make sure, like, if there's been, to try to figure out what their level of care is. So, because I know sometimes they'll be like, oh, well, mom doesn't need PT or OT anymore, but then maybe a week goes by and she's not back at her base level. And then you can recommend to get back on OT and PT. And so, yeah, I hope that answers your question.
We've got time for one more.
Sorry.
Got one right here.
So, if I was interested in finding out, like, the state regulations specific to Medicaid homes, do I have to go on the Medicaid site? And even though somebody online had asked a question, I still wasn't quite clear what the HCCFA or SA?
S.
F?
S is in Sam.
Okay. And what exactly is that?
Okay, back in the day, it used to be called DADS. It's, and I'm probably saying it wrong, it's can someone help me out with this, the Health and
Health and Human Services. It's, it's the website that has all the policies and procedures for any kind of licensed community, agency, everything on it. And it's H is in Henry, C is in Charles, SSA, Sam, Apple.
Yeah, DADS was the Department of Aging and Disability Services, and then a few years ago, the state reorganized everything and put them under Health and Human Services. And so it's the same basic organization. They just gave them all new names and put a brand new website up and everything else. They have the list of all of the state regulations that all of the licensed communities are required to adhere to in order to keep their licenses.
And they also have all the information of their state inspections and their deficiencies and their remedies. But keep in mind that what you're looking at is probably not current.
Correct, yeah. So you can go and you can look up a community and see what their reports have been from their annual inspections. But as noted, you know, like every other business out there, the state is working at 33% less employees, and so it's probably not completely up to date. That's why you need to rely on one of these experts here, like Sarah, like Michael. They can take you to the communities to visit them, and they know all these communities personally and can help you with that as well.
You can also go to the Medicare.gov site, and they have a rating system. So that can be a good tool as well.
I want to say thank you to these experts for coming today. Thank you, Cyndi. Thank you, Sharon. Thank you. And especially a big thank you to Sharon, because Sharon has put together the GPS conference for us for many years. This is her baby. And we are very grateful for her vision just to create something that's amazing that's happening year after year. We want to thank you for coming today. As I mentioned, I know it takes a lot of time as caregivers for us to take this time out to come and to be here today. I hope that it has been helpful for you in your journey. Remember, these amazing experts all around the room who have spent their day with you as well are tremendous allies for us in our journey. And finally, for everyone at home, thank you for joining us as well and taking your time out. Finally, I want to remind all of us, myself included as a caregiver, remember, there is never ever any shame in asking for help, because we all need it at some point in our lives. As we've discussed today, nobody teaches us how to do all these things. We don't inherently know all of this knowledge. We don't know all of this stuff. And so at some point, we're all going to need that help. That's why these great resources have been here today, is to help with that. So never feel ashamed in asking and reaching out, because we're all going to need that.